It sounded like a lion roaring, yet I wasn't scared. His hand on my waist was almost bruisingly tight, but the other one ran across my shoulders and back, checking for injuries. His nostrils flared as if he was smelling something, and it wasn't something he liked. Everything? He forced out, his mouth barely opening, his voice distorted. The British accent was gone, replaced by something that sounded a lot more Irish instead. Impossible, I would have smelled the... He trailed off, looking shocked to have spoken those words out loud. Smelled what? He was confusing the hell out of me. Continue, he said when the silence stretched. I was simply staring at him. Did I imagine it, or had his eyes really turned back to a much lighter shade? The same stormy gray I'd seen that first day we met. I feel so stupid. He seemed nice, and I wanted to get my mind off things. I shivered when I could only just refrain myself from saying you instead of things. It was becoming harder every minute not to pay attention to the fact that I was sitting in his lap, being held by his arms. We just talked, for at least an hour. I didn't think any of it when he asked me to go somewhere quiet. I trailed off again, looking away from his face as shame colored my cheeks. I was such an idiot. Alexander was still tense, but again I felt a caress across my mind. It told me not to doubt myself. I had been naive, not stupid. Sarah should have warned you. She knew you'd never been to such a party before. Alexander said out loud, adding on to the caress in my head. Sarah shouldn't have to babysit me. We're both 18, I said defensively. I suddenly felt the urge to let him know clearly that I was an adult too. When he chuckled, his chest vibrated against me. I had to bite down hard on my tongue to keep from moaning again. Flushing with embarrassment, I had bit hard enough for the coppery taste of blood to spread through my mouth. I wanted to leave. He just jumped on me. He stole my first kiss. It was supposed to be special, not like that. The words tumbled from my mouth to hide what I was feeling. His vile taste on my lips and his hands on my body as I remembered were enough to forget all about my embarrassment. Alexander ran a hand over my back, all the way up to clasp around the back of my neck. You'll receive plenty of special kisses in the future, Brit, that I promise. All my fear, disgust, self-loathing, and anger towards Fort drained away at those words. It felt as if he meant to be the one to give them to me too. His accent as he spoke still sounded more Irish than British, and briefly, I wondered where he really came from. You don't get it, I exclaimed then. I'm a girl. We have all these romantic images about how that first kiss should be. I bet you don't even remember, but I will, for the rest of my life. Shocked at my own outburst, I stared at him, searching for a sign that told me I hadn't offended him. His eyes had darkened again to an almost unnatural black, but he seemed otherwise relaxed now. I realized he wasn't staring at my eyes, but at my lips. Horrified, I realized my mouth was still hanging open. Before I could close it though, that hand on my neck pulled me towards him as he leaned in, our mouths connecting. His kiss was very soft and gentle, completely opposite to my experience with Fort. Everything seemed to be on fire, my toes curling in those damned heels, electricity sizzling my nerves. It was the best feeling ever. It felt like coming home, like being loved, and most of all, it felt like finally being whole. When we finally pulled apart, I was panting. His breathing seemed to be all right, but his eyes were still dark, and now they were glazed over. With a gentle hand, he carefully smoothed my hair away from my face. There, now I stole your second kiss, he whispered rather huskily. Only then did it sink in that I'd been kissing my teacher, and that sitting in his lap was highly inappropriate, no matter how young and handsome he was. Kissing him had been the most amazing thing I'd ever done, and it was wrong. How could something that felt so right be wrong? Still, I scrambled to my feet and smoothed down my dress hurriedly. He followed my every move with hungry eyes. I should, shower and go to bed. My own voice sounded anything but steady. Of course, was all Alexander said as he smoothly flowed to his feet. Without another word, he took my hand and pulled me with him towards the stairs, guiding me to the bathroom upstairs. At the door to it, he left me with a few clean towels. Just as I was about to enter, so I could at long last calm my rapid beating heart, he called out, "How did you get away?" "I kicked him where the sun don't shine," I said, offering him a hesitant smile. Was he hurt that I ran away from him after his kiss? Despite the fact that I'd obviously kissed him back, the look on his face could only be described as proud though. Was he seriously proud I kicked that guy? I undressed hurriedly and got into the shower without looking at myself in the mirror. I didn't need to see the bruises to know they were there. I turned the water to scalding hot, needing to feel it burn my skin just the slightest bit so I could erase the sensory memories of my ordeal with Fort. I stood under the hot water spray for at least an hour, but I still didn't feel like myself when I stepped onto the cold tile floor. I felt dirty even though I'd never been this clean. I felt vulnerable, naked, so I quickly dried off and slipped into my PJs, loose sweats, and a too large shirt. Even dressed, I still felt vulnerable and lonely, but I didn't dare go find Alexander to keep me company. Instead, I went to the guest room Sarah had prepared for me earlier that day. The room was large and white, but the curtains were heavy. The large bed in the middle looked like a giant ice cube. I curled up in the middle of it and piled the blankets high up around me. It was cold and I felt exhausted from all the stress. Pretty soon, I was shaking again. I felt like crying because I was still angry at myself for falling into Fort's trap so blindly. Before the tears could fall, I felt that presence in my mind again. It seemed as if I could almost hear a strange lullaby in my head, the melody soft and beautiful. The words, if there were any, were in a strange language I couldn't understand. It had that Irish sound to it, though. I fell asleep thinking of soft, drizzling rain, rugged yet beautiful green nature, and Alexander's kiss. All of it was saturated with a warm feeling of love and complete acceptance. Faintly in the background, I heard the voices of Sarah and Alexander talking. Alexander sounded very angry. The touch on my mind was suddenly gone, but I was so relaxed that I fell asleep very shortly after that. I woke up panting as if someone had been holding me underwater while I struggled to get air into my lungs. Shaking all over, I remembered only too clearly what my nightmare had been about. Fort. Only he wasn't really Fort, because somehow halfway through reliving my memory of the night, he changed into a snarling wolf, bigger and more menacing than any wolf I'd ever seen. He'd been drooling all over me as he opened his mouth with rows of gleaming white sharp teeth, ready to tear my throat out. Then out of nowhere, such as only happened in dreams, Alexander had appeared flinging the wolf off me, attacking it with his bare hands. I wanted to scream and pull Alexander away from the snapping jaws, but someone was holding me back. Alexander was growling while the wolf snarled, and soon all I could see was matted brown fur. Alexander buried underneath the huge creature, blood pooling around the wrestling forms. Alexander's blood. I shook my head to dispel the dream, but fear was racing through my veins. I was both scared for Alexander's life, unreasonable as it was, and terrified of Fort for a whole new reason. I couldn't shake the thought that he really was a wolf. A wolf in sheep's clothes. The large, dark room had shadows looming everywhere, and I couldn't take it anymore. I yanked the blankets that had tangled around me away and nearly fell out off bed in my hurry to get to the door. I'll just go to Sarah, I thought. She'll understand. Even though a small part of me thought, wouldn't you rather go to Alexander instead? I nearly screamed at the shadow in the hall, but it was only Bob. I didn't mean to scare you, he mumbled apologetically, his blue eyes gleaming silver in the sparse light. It reminded me of the eyes of a cat. My heart was hammering in my chest, and it seemed he was looking straight at it instead of my face. That's the room you are looking for, Bob said, one long arm stretching out gracefully to point at a door a little ways down. Thank you, I mumbled, already rushing towards it. His strange behavior was only spurring my panic on. I didn't really have a clear idea of what to do when I reached Sarah, but I was sure she would calm me down. I stumbled through the door ungracefully, closing it behind me with a click that sounded louder in the silence next to my heavy breathing. This room was even darker then, the guest room, but I could faintly make out the bed. I hurried towards it. I was lucky there was nothing in my path. Are you awake? I asked softly, trying desperately to calm my breathing and heartbeat. Sarah didn't need to know how shaken I was. Of course I glamo growy. What's wrong? The suave voice that spoke from the dark was distinctly male, and I knew from the furious blush and the tingling spreading over my body that it was Alexander. Oh, Bob sent me to the wrong room. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, making it hard for me to speak. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house. It had me nearly jumping out of my skin. Nightmare, I squeaked, the shock helping me speak. I was chanting in my head, please don't send me away. I don't want to be alone. Please. A warm hand gently grabbed mine and pulled me closer to the bed. Rustling told me he pulled back the blanket. Call me here then. He quickly pulled me into the bed with him, although memories of my ordeal and the dream had me rushing into his arms as soon as the words left his mouth, my haste causing me to fall down rather than lay down. The blanket was deliciously warm, and so was his body as I buried my face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around me tightly so that there was hardly any space between us. Even through my panic, I could feel he wasn't wearing a shirt. "Don't worry, I'll protect you." "I'd never send you away," he whispered softly in my ear, his warm breath blowing across my face. "Go to sleep. Agramo choi." I resisted the silly urge to run my hands over his skin to check if he wasn't hurt. It was just a dream. There was no such thing as Fort changing into a wolf and killing Alexander. A feather-light touch on my mind, just the strong sense of love this time, steadied my heartbeat. Alexander softly started humming, a lullaby, the melody familiar, although I recognized no words. The steady movement of his chest going up and down as he breathed right underneath my head was very comforting. The panic